So let's just go ahead and move along. Thank you very much for those of you who are here with us today. You have your NEDC representatives from New Mexico and from Washington, and I'm going to move this forward. So my colleague, go ahead and introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. If you were on this morning, get to hear me talk twice. My name is Anita Gonzales, and I am the Deputy Director from the state of New Mexico. And I'm also lead on the technical interview portion of the NEDC.
And hi there, everyone. So I'm also the community representative from Washington MESA. And in particular, I am a director from the Yakima Valley Tri-Cities MESA Center. We're located in I call it South Central Washington State. Literally, if you look at us as a rectangle, I'm right in the middle at the bottom. And of course, again, representing Washington MESA. And just so we have a better sense of everyone who is in the room, if you can just there's only a few of us, so if you would like to unmute and kind of just share, well, this is sensitive, where you are from to give a shout out, we would appreciate that. And alternatively, you can also just enter it in the chat if you're more comfortable with that.
Hi, I'm Kees de Groot. I'm the Executive Director from Rhode Island MESA, and I'm here to learn.
All right, thank you. All right, I see we have Ashley from Tacoma Mesa. Yay!
I'm from Socorro, New Mexico, and I'm the MESA coordinator from Socorro High School.
Nice, welcome. All right, will anyone like to share real quick before we move on? And then just a reminder, everyone can see it, we are recording. All right, so to get us started, so the biggest thing that we hear as, the committee and even as a MESA director, for myself personally, locally, everyone really needs to understand what is the difference between the technical interview versus the pitch, because I feel in these last few years, there has still just been, confusion, not really understanding, the difference, how do we distinguish between the two? And so before we start off, we decided to make just like a quick list. What is the difference between the two? So let's go back to the ask, so as it is with the challenge itself, our students are asked to implement this human-centered design approach where they engineer a solution that solves an inequity within their community, as experienced whether by an individual or a group of individuals, where of course they need to be able to implement that coding component as a key component in their design. And then we have these two components. One of the biggest differences between the two is technical interview. It's in the name. We want you to be technical. This is for our students to focus on their design, to be able to provide that overview, to describe the design. How does it work? This is really that nuts and bolts. So when you think back about the objective of the technical interview, we want to know, how does that prototype work? We want to have that explanation of those mechanical operations. We want to know, the integration of components, whether it's coding, sensors, whatever hardware, software, that they are utilizing. But more importantly, really understanding that they understand and are knowledgeable on the design process that was used. Was it human, centered focus? So that is your biggest takeaway. And Anita, and if I miss anything, please jump in. So, because I know,
but it looks great. Yes, I know it looks great.
And so more importantly, in addition to presenting, you will have that interview session with judges, where they're going to do a deeper dive in what you created, and spend some time with you. And as Anita has shared with us earlier in the high-level overview, this is all done in private. So I also wanted to emphasize, this is just with the student team and the judges, focusing on their prototype, again, the design process, that demonstration, and then being able to, engage with them, answer their questions. We really want this to be, comfortable, conversational. They can also, Anita will go into a little bit deeper dive, but just key differences. Now it comes to your pitch. So when you think about your pitch, this is where we want you to be non-technical. And it's really about sharing that story. We want our student teams to be in this, Shark Tank or infomercial mindset, because again, going back to the objective of the pitch, we really want them to be able to convince, the audience that their design meets the user's needs and is equitable within its design. So of course, you'll have some overlap with, introducing the user, but again, it's in a non-technical means. And this is also when the student teams can share, why do they care? Why was this important to them? Why were they interested in this? So not only are they able to describe their design, their product, but really focusing on that, the user, the impact, the need, again, how does it promote equity? How is it innovative? And although there's also a demonstration component, they're demonstrating it in the lens of how the user would use it, but also reinforcing how it met their needs and their criteria. And just to give you an example, I'm thinking of my high school national team from Washington State in last summer in 2020. Well, I guess technically it's still 2022. It was important to them to create a device where emergency road signs can be converted into other languages. Because in our community, we have a large, Latino, Latinx community, as well as an Eastern European community. And when you come across, the freeways, within our local area, because we have 3 that intersect our city, where it's actually an area composed of 3 cities adjacent to each other. There are many individuals within our community who can't read them. And so now all of a sudden it's a safety issue. If there isn't someone who is there who can interpret, which one of the individuals on the teams, he always had to interpret for his mom. And so this was something that was very important to him and as well as the rest of his team members. So that was their start. They didn't really know how to code or what they were going to do, but they were able to recognize a problem within their community that was important to them and that was a concern to them. So that was where they kind of focused on their pitch. And last but not least, to just remember, this is all presented publicly. All of our student teams, they present in front of the judges, they present in front of audience. Unless at the state level, your state may determine or change it slightly, but definitely for those who progress at the national level, it will be public. And if there are any questions, feel free to ask away. All right, so I know there are many of us who either have previous experience or maybe there are those who are completely new to this year's challenge, but I just wanted to focus on a few key differences to highlight of the what's new before we take a deeper dive into the rubric itself and the ask of, the criteria that needs to be met. So big differences that we did for this year in comparison to last year. Time, we reduced the presentation pitch time. So I know that's going to be a relief for many of our students from 5 to 7 minutes down to 3 to 5. And because the pitch is intended to be non-technical, we were trying to be very mindful of removing any of those confusing elements that had a technical aspect because it shouldn't be here. And so we try to be very mindful to remove those. And I believe that may have influenced why our rubric elements, so like all the criteria of that needed to be met for scoring, literally went down from 17 things to 12 things. And so although it reduced our criteria, we kept the scoring the same. So the value of the pitch is still 100 points. So that also meant that the value of certain criteria increase in order for us to maintain that. All right, so rubric scoring. So a lot of this is broken down, and what I did is I both, I don't know if you can see my cursor pointed and circled, because I really wanted to stress again those criteria that have now multiplied, 2 to 3 times, because typically they range from 0 to 5 points. But now all of a sudden we have the problem, the user impact and need, key features, equity, the demonstration are now worth double to 3 times the points available for students. All right, so at this time, I want us to just kind of practice. So I'm going to bring this back up, and I should have taken a screenshot to add in case. So I know there's a few of us here that are present, and I want to break us up into teams of 2. And I want you to reflect on this rubric, because again, with the pitch, the biggest thing, it's about the user, it's about the inequity, it's about that need, and it's about the impact and designing this solution that will aid them. So we're going to do something short and sweet. I want each of us to take a few minutes to just grab an object within your household or wherever you may be. Don't think too much about it. It can be anything, but I'm going to pair you up, and where between the 2 of you, you can determine which item you want to focus on. And I want you to start thinking about, what can the problem be with this object? Is there inequity? Is there a user need? Is there some type of impact that we can address? And spend some time brainstorming and coming up just with a quick 60-second pitch, a few sentences or 2 of what it is, what you're doing, what is that inequity. And that will just kind of help us, get within that mindset. I mean, obviously, we're not going through the full process of what the students would typically do, but it at least helps you be able to create a little bit of that pitch, that influence, that sharing, that storytelling that the students will have to engage when they create their own designs. So I'm going to give you about 3 minutes. Go and find something, come back, and then we're going to send everyone to a breakout room. So on my clock, I have 12:30 or 1:30 Mountain Time. And so I'm going to give you, actually just changed to 12:31. So I'm going to give you a quick 3 minutes to grab an item.
And if you happen to get back early, if you just want to maybe turn on maybe like one of your reactions, like a thumbs up or whatnot when you're ready to go.
Stop sharing here so we can see each other a little bit easier. Right. Right. I think we are almost ready. We have one more minute. If you can hear my voice. All right, Anita, I think we got mostly thumbs up from everyone.
So do you want me to go ahead and open up, give the are you gonna give the instructions and I'll open up the rooms?
All right, I'm gonna put it again within the chat. And just as a reminder, and let's go ahead and, again, 60-second pitch, determine the item between the two of you. And we're gonna give you about 8 minutes. Oh, actually, it might be 5 minutes. How am I doing on time, Anita?
Your part, you have about 10 minutes left, 15 minutes. So yeah, you're good. You're good. We're good. So I'm gonna go ahead and open up all the rooms and you'll be paired. One group will have 3 and the other rooms have 2. Okay.
First for your respective group. If anyone would like to volunteer, I would appreciate that. And I am going to start the recording again. All right. So again, if you can at least share with us, I'm going to go to room 1. So I believe that was Melba and Denise. If you can share with us, what was your item and your pitch?
Okay, yes. Hello, everyone. I am group with Denise. We are in group 1. So we are from New Mexico. So our object is the slinky. This is the slinky, a plastic slinky. So this will be our pitch, a minute pitch. Everybody loves how to play slinkies. Other than toys, slinkies have been used in pick and picking, drapery holder, antennas, light fixtures, window decorations. And this is very important when you're teaching waves, so you can teach different types of waves out of slinky. And this can also be used as a table decoration and mail holder as well. So Denise can add some more.
Let me unmute myself. We also said that since it's made out of plastic, we can also melt it down into different types of molds to use for paper cups, plates, spoons. And we also said that it can also be used as another kind of a source of putting in a box and things being out to make things fun.
Thank you. And that's our elevator pitch, some 60 seconds elevator pitch. Thank you so much.
All right, nice. Thank you. All right, from room 2, we had Andy and Trevor.
Yeah, I found a coaster. This coaster is made out of tin, and it is mined in Indonesia, and it's manufactured in Indonesia. When you look at things from Indonesia, you immediately think about human rights issues associated with mining and environmental impact issues associated with global environmental quality. The other question you would always want to ask is, well, why does anybody need a coaster made out of tin? And then who would use a coaster that's made out of tin unless someone gave it to you like they did to me? So the question then becomes, what can we do to mitigate that? Should we actually be mining things like this? And what should we be doing with things like this when we do it? Tin has great industrial capabilities, and probably as a decorative item, it may not be the best use of the product. Trevor, do you have anything you want to say?
Yeah, I didn't have a whole lot to add to that. We didn't necessarily identify. I mean, so the user, I'm not sure this is a product that provides a solution, but actually encourages many questions. And so like we came out of this with more questions about alternative uses for the tin and whatnot. So our elevator pitch is not maybe selling this product, but it was leading to additional discussion, which I think is important.
And it is. And again, because it's a random item, we're not asking for a solution here, just more of what is that problem? What is that inequity? What could it be? What could the impact be? What could the need be if you were to change it? It just gives you just a chance to just think about it, just from a different lens.
Yeah, and I think that this would, like we said, lead to more discussions in like if there's a need for this type of product, alternative, more sustainable options for creation is with the direction we go.
All right, thank you. All right, how about from room 3?
Thank you, Andy.
I think Ashley was going to talk for us.
Oh, sorry, yeah. So I picked the Nintendo Switch for my house. And some of the things that I kind of noticed is that it's like a really big device, that it's kind of hard to hold, that it has a couple of different things that like to turn around the controller or like separate it and use the device differently, like as 2 players. And I kind of discussed like how the difficulty of like how the difficulty it could be for someone with limited mobility. And so that's kind of where the discussion was with the Nintendo Switch.
Nice. Well, thank you. Thank you all for sharing with us. So I'm going to go back as we wrap up when it comes to the pitch. So going back and looking at that rubric, one of the things that I think for us to stress with our student teams is that there's actually really an opportunity to maximize. When you focus on what is that problem, who is your user, and mind you, I know I just say user, but really your user, your community, that need, that impact, and what is that inequity that is being addressed. And then if you add that to the engagement piece with your demonstration, the key features, how it'll be used by the user, now all of a sudden you're over half the points just by doing that. And then if you just simply add the team being present, okay, introducing themselves, all voices are heard, all are participating and saying why they care. Now, all of a sudden, they're up to 70 points just by doing that. And so I really wanted to emphasize that I know that sometimes there's a lot of stress, coming from the teams, coming from the teachers, I hear it, I've been there, I've been within the classroom. And we are going to provide some resources at the end to kind of help them, with the structure and the things to, specifically think about when it comes to their pitch or their technical interview. But if you're able just to answer these and add these into the pitch that you're creating, you're going to be there. And I guess with one final takeaway, I would also say, remember that they're really sharing a story. I know that we say, the Shark Tank and that infomercial, mindset, but really it's a story. You want your audience to be able to, empathize along with them, because if you start building those connections, and especially those deep connections, with the judge, the audience, they're going to remember your students, they're going to remember their design, they're going to remember what they said. And more importantly, when they're engaged and you're able to connect with your audience and judges, they're going to have fun. They're going to be able to enjoy what they're doing. It's just really, following that rubric, following, the structure that's provided, remembering those key differences. And I feel that they will be able to be successful in what they create. And especially just remembering 3 to 5 minutes. Is it as bad as they think any longer? And also reminding them it's public. So with that being said, are there any other final questions when it comes to the pitch before I pass it on to Anita, who would lead us into the technical presentation and interview portion. Okay, Anita, the floor is yours.
So now we're switching gears, and we are going to be jumping into the technical interview. So in this case, I just wanted to highlight, what's important within the technical interview and how to frame out what a good interview looks like. Okay, so when we're talking about the technical interview, one thing that's important is the time. This is the longest event, longest live event. So the total time that a team should expect to be with their judges is 20 minutes. And when we're planning, we allocate, 30 minutes. So the judges have time to really evaluate this section for their student teams. So during that 20 minutes, students will have 10 minutes to deliver a technical presentation, including a demo, and then 10 minutes, up to 10 minutes for interview follow-up, with reminders. So the different designation, is that 10 minutes, the judges are just letting them go. And they should, at this point, give an overview and hit, all the main points within that presentation. And then the interview is just, that follow-up piece done between the judges and the students. Number two, I want to talk about is support material. So in this event, the support material is pretty important as a supplement to your project. There's no guidelines as to what that support material has to look like, because everybody's project can be a little bit different. And so, but some examples are an engineering notebook, either your code somehow, printed or on a screen or somehow to be able to share your code with the judges, the poster, an academic poster or something else you create, pictures of iterations. You are allowed to bring essentially almost any item into the technical interview that you would like, with the exception of no electronic presentations. So again, because there is, comparing the two, in the pitch, you are expected to have a PowerPoint or a Prezi or something similar. When they come into the technical interview, they are not able to use that at all. So they just need to come in and talk and have a conversation. And number three is the questions. Like, what do we mean by questions? Again, the judges will just bounce off, questions off of the student team. They'll either be clarifications on something that the student team presented that they want like a deeper dive into, or we have identified different areas that are fair game, when the judges are asking questions. So they're not going to be totally out of left field. All the questions that the judges do give are instructed to fall within one of these areas. Usability of the prototype, the objective, EDP or the engineering design process, materials technology, data, conclusions, and or support materials. So again, not anything unrelated so I don't want, for your teams, your student teams to be nervous that they're going to get these, off the wall questions. They all need to fall within that scope area. Okay. So jumping into the rubric, one thing I want to note is this is, again, the longest rubric because it takes a lot of time on there. In this case, it's 2 pages of rubric, and I'm going to go on a little bit later about like a sample interview to kind of hit everything. The one thing you should be very conscious of is, as with helping your student team, is that a good presentation, the first 10 minutes, should kind of cover, at least very generally, almost everything in this rubric, kind of touch on all the little things that the judges have something to follow up with. If you miss a large section, like say you go through your presentation and say you don't really talk about your code at all or very much, that might be what your questions may have to be allotted if the judges get to that question, and you may not be able to score in that area if you don't at least give some sort of start on that topic. Also of note is the rubric and the point scores. So all of the items are worth between 5 and 0 points. And so what we talk to our judges and how we instruct them is like, if they've hit it, if they've met the criteria, it's a 3. And a 3 is not bad. A 3 is good. A 3 is indicating that they have met the criteria. Now, what really will put students into that 4 and that 5 point range is when they're able to elaborate or go into more detail and really show mastery of that content area, which is often pulled out during the interview questions. Okay, so here on this first page, you'll see they're talking about, the design overview knowledge. Usability just means, how the user is able to use the prototype within the demonstration, the impact it has, and then we're getting into just there's few things on, user why making the product, and then you're getting into the technology, the materials, the coding, and data. So again, really technically heavy. So I'm going to go to the next one. And on the second page, again, just continuing on with the engineering design process, any challenges, solutions, testing whenever they're doing, assuming that our students are following the engineering design process, they should be researching, building, having a prototype, testing it out. Did it work? Did it not work? Making the needed changes. And all of these should be, again, human-centered design motivated. So they should be with the user in mind when they're making these choices and making these changes to their prototype. And this is where the interview really wants to tackle on is what choices were made, why they were made, and does the student team understand these choices? Okay. And there is, smaller team at the bottom. There is one topic about sorry, just the one thing I want to know, and Liz had mentioned it in the pitch also, both of these are really heavy and emphasize the teamwork and all of the team participating. So I always tell, student teams or teachers that ask when they're building their team dynamic is to build a team with different skill sets and, working that, all team members should contribute, equally-ish, in the sense that they may not all contribute the same way, but they should all be putting into this project and be able to identify where all the team members are contributing. Now go ahead and switch over. So with the rubric, some tips for success within the interview, what I have seen have really helped some of our student teams is practice. Even though there's a lot of time, that 10 minutes that they have goes extremely fast, and for them to just really practice. They don't have a PowerPoint. You can take in materials if you like, but the teams that do really well are the teams that you can tell have really practiced and know their material very well. And that it's a very structured presentation to where it's very intentional versus just rambling on. Even within the demonstration, it's very easy when student teams start talking about their prototype and they get into the demoing. If it's not a practiced, structured demo, it's very easy to take the 10 minutes just doing that, including, setting it up or whatnot. So that's just a really big thing, is that to really monitor their time well, practicing their presentation and also practicing answering questions, because that's another skill that maybe not all of our students have had. Being able to answer questions succinctly, and, getting to the point. Again, there is only 10 minutes for Q&A. If a judge asks a question and a student may or may not be very entirely practiced on answering, they're oftentimes able to just take the whole 10 minutes on just answering one question. And then the judges haven't had the opportunity to dive deeper into other areas. And then that may mean that they may not score as well, just because they don't get to enough questions amongst the judges. Okay. Along with that, the divide and conquer strategy, meaning there's a lot of knowledge that goes into these projects and into the prototypes and into whatnot. Again, successful teams often, they've divided up the responsibilities of the different team members so that they're individual experts within their realm, in their world. So if one team member was the main builder, well, then he or she would answer those questions appropriately when it related to building. If he or she was the main coder, then they would answer those questions accordingly if there was a question about coding, and be able to answer those things. So that also helps the work for your student teams, that they feel a little bit more comfortable when they know that they're just experts in their subject matter, with some cross-referencing in case of emergencies. But for the most part, that really has helped the teams be able to streamline that. And within those two, I have this little arrow here to use the bigger MESA family, that anyone can help you. Like, I don't know if you guys have ever watched Akilah the Bee, and when she's practicing for her spelling bee, and it's like there's teachers everywhere and there's helpers everywhere. And so when I say practice, you know, some of the best helpers for our student teams are people that come from, you know, different areas around you, your family members who may or may not be very technical or well-versed. You know, how do you phrase things in a way to get them to understand? It could be your teachers that are very familiar with their project and they're able to dig a little bit deeper into your questions. Maybe you have a community member that is an engineer and they're able to really quiz you on some of those, you know, maybe hard technical words or whatnot. But the more times that you can have practice talking and the more times that you can have practice interviewing, the better. And it really helps the teams solidify their skills. Another tip is to utilize your supplemental materials. It is actually a rubric item, but really successful teams know how to select good supplemental materials and use them during their presentation, meaning it's not suggested that just they bring everything in their work area into the interview with them and it's just a pile of stuff. Like, everything should be very intentional. Like, as they're talking about the engineering design process, if they're able to, you know, highlight, we've been working on this project now for 6 months, you know, this is our work that we've been doing and what we've been going through, if asked. If they want to talk about their code, well, here is our commented code, and, you know, this is what line 1 should mean, line 3 should mean, and, you know, you have a copy for the judges to be able to see the code or whatever you've chosen to use. If you're talking about, we did 2 or 3 iterations of our device, maybe on your poster you have pictures of those 2 or 3 iterations, whatever your presentation is. So that's why there's not exact 100% direction on what supplemental materials. It's just to be very intentional about selecting supplemental materials that enhance your project, whatever that may look like. And then lastly, just kind of the statement that a good interview is a follow-up to the presentation. And maybe I should have put not a replacement for the presentation. So again, getting into that, like a good, if this team comes in, they're prepared, they really utilize those first 10 minutes well, and they're able to go through and kind of hit all the items, the judges are really able to follow up well and get into those higher score areas. If within the presentation, student teams have missed some items or missed a good chunk of maybe what to score, the judges will have to take that time to try to pull out answers and to try to attain any score in maybe one of those line items. And they may or may not get to it. And so some of those rubric areas just may not be able to be scored. And then generally the interview in general, it's a conversation between the judges and the students. So the team should feel very comfortable sharing their project and taking ownership of their work. This is where it's really apparent to the judges, you know, what student work has been done, you know, what they know, how far they are in their project. You can really tell in this interview process, because it is this conversation versus not everything, you know, they really need to have some sort of ownership and knowledge about their project. And kids are brutally truthful. You know, you ask them and they may say things like, oh, I don't know that. My dad did all of that part. Or, you know, oh no, the kid that did all of the coding, he's out sick today. So we don't know any of that. We didn't do any of that. You know, they'll tell you either where they're at. And if you say you ask them challenges, but they're also very, very honest and very good about, you know, sharing, you know, the duties, like, well, you know, my buddy here, he did all the work on that. So he's going to answer that, you know, being able to punt to your team members and utilize your team members. But it's really easy to, during this interview, you really get an idea of the team dynamics and the team roles. So in this case, there is, again, no 100% format to say follow 1, 2, 3, X, Y, Z, because everybody's prototype is going to look a little bit differently. But this is a sample presentation format, and maybe some things that you should consider hitting, or maybe, you know, an idea of maybe how to structure your presentation. And that little picture there, this was taken from our state competition because it's closed. We don't have a recording of interviews just for, this is the private event. But if you can see, this is what it may look like. Whereas, you have the judge panel facing the students. In this case, the student team, they had a trifold. So again, for nationals, the requirement is they have the electronic poster as a separate area, but whatever they bring into this interview is whatever they want to bring into this interview. So like, for instance, this trifold wasn't their academic poster, but it was a supplement that they brought into their technical interview to use. And so, yeah, whatever you bring in is, kind of fair game in here. So a sample presentation format, the team should introduce themselves, themselves and possibly the role, like first, very important, because again, the difference between this and the pitch, they should give briefly, like a user overview, the purpose of the project, and generally research. They're not going to get into a lot of the items that are covered in the pitch, but they need to give enough of understanding of their project so that the judges know like why this project is important. And then I would, they would have to go into on their prototype, key features of the prototype, materials they maybe chose to use, the technology they chose to use, the code that they chose to use, and parts of their prototype with the whys as needed. So like, for instance, oftentimes in a final project, we decided to use duct tape because this is just our prototype and it's really cost effective. And, we tried Scotch tape and it didn't work very well, so, they should be getting into some of their materials, and that would alone, cover, 3 or 4 rubric items there. This is a good time to highlight, if as needed or as able, any iterations of their project and how the team used the engineering design process to get to their final project. Maybe they went to 2 or 3 prototypes, maybe within their website, they built one and then it didn't work or didn't get good feedback from their client. So they went back and they changed some functionality on it. And this is now their final project. And then getting into the demonstration, and the demonstration, depending upon the final end product, could be interwoven amongst some of these items, but how would the client use it? And what is a situation when, when the client or the user would use their product? And when they're demonstrating it, like not only how are the materials working, but how is the code working? Like what data, what's the input, what's the output? Like what's happening when the prototype is being used, like what's going on there. And then ending the presentation with any conclusions, recommendations, suggestions. Like we've only gotten to part 1, in future work, we hope to add this, but this works now for our client and they're very happy with it, or whatever, whatever the conclusions and recommendations may be. So that's the first half. Now getting into the interview, I again, when a judge asks the questions, it could be just follow up to maybe what is presented. So maybe the students talked about a certain terminology. Maybe they use certain terminology about their prototype. And the judge has a follow-up question, like you mentioned friction. How is friction exactly used in your device? So again, if they're using certain terminology, they should be expected to be able to explain that if asked. So if anyone is helping them with their scripts, I would be very conscientious to have them use vocabulary that they are familiar with and be able to understand the words that they're using. And they're expected to be at their grade level. So, like if it's a 6th grader using stuff verbatim from, a textbook, but they don't really understand what they're talking about, the judges might be able to pick up on some of that. So, so the interview questions will either be follow-up questions to maybe what the students already gave, and that's the ideal, or 2, again, coming into some of these basic questions. So again, within usability, can you show how the prototype is used by the user client? This question, if it's a good presentation, probably shouldn't even have to be asked because it has already been told to them. You know, but in case that the student team didn't give this information in their presentation, this is something that the judge may have to take time on to be able to score in that topic area. The team objective, can you show how the prototype is used by the user and or client? Can you show us your team engineering design notebook if you have one, like especially if they allude to it, like often teams will say, we use this in the process, or we use that in the process. Materials technology, why did they select their items? The data, the big one, can you show us your code? They should be prepared to show their code, especially since the code and its functionality is worth 2 to 3 rubric items. And then again, being able to give recommendations for their next project. And so we have a couple of minutes. And so given that, you see some of these questions. And in the chat, if you can put in maybe, what would you ask if you were a judge? Like within those content areas, usability, objective, maybe what are some questions you would think to ask a student team once they're presenting to you within those areas?
All right, I see one within the chat. I would ask what their limitations were and how they overcame them. It's a great question.
And especially for students to understand within the engineering design process, it is built in to have limitations, and it's built in to have failures and to rebuild and to continually just working at it. So question, what inspired them to do the project? Yes, that's a great one. And that gets into the client and the user and why they selected that need. What was the biggest challenge you faced during the engineering design process? That is a good question, and that's actually double loaded for judges, because then they can see, do you even know what the engineering design process is, for one? And then 2, are they able to be self-reflective enough to understand where the challenges lie within that process? What was a major breakthrough in your design process? I think that's a big one, because all student teams, Liz at the beginning mentioned, you know, her students and their journey when they were creating their their idea and their prototype. Like they had this great idea, and I'm imagining, or I'm assuming, there's always that point when they're actually designing and the prototype just works. You know, their idea has come to fruition and it works. And that is that breakthrough time when they're like, we got a code to work, or we decided on this sensor and it did exactly what we had envisioned. And I think it's great for kids to recognize their own brilliance in their designs. Any last questions that anybody wants to add? What feedback did you receive from your user when they tested your prototype? Yes. And some of those, that leads to, so like, for instance, in the pitch, they do talk, you know, about like client feedback or user feedback oftentimes. But it's important here because like how all these pieces interchange from each other. And it's also important to note that the judges for one event are rarely the judges in another event. So like for a student team to assume that like, well, I put that in my brief, or I put that in my poster, but they didn't talk about it here. Like oftentimes I'll see students come into a technical interview and this really amazing poster is behind them when they take it into the room, and they don't use it one bit. It's just there. And they don't, like, they're talking about stuff and it's not referenced and it's not shown. These judges have not fully evaluated that poster because they're not the poster judges. So if you bring the poster into your room, you know, practice in your interview and in your questioning when you would use it. So if you get asked a question about your code and it's right there on your poster, well, thank you, judge number 1. You know, let me go ahead and show it to you right here. Or if they're talking about tests that you've done, you're like, well, here's my data chart right here. Or, you know, as you can see here, you know, just pointing out using those items. And so, like, again, talking about users and clients, they may have addressed it in the pitch, but students should never assume that the judges know anything when they're walking into the room. And then if you would do this project again, what would you do differently? That's a great ending right there into their conclusions. And it really gives them a time to self-reflect on their project. And so with that, this is a QR code here just to the MESA USA site that we've talked about this morning. This is just where the handbook is, where resources are. If you want to take your phone, get a QR code if you're not familiar where that is, bookmark that page for us, or for you, not for us, but for you. And I believe that is it. And then go ahead and Liz, I think, is at the end of the slides. I believe that is our last slide. Yes. And so Liz, go ahead. I'll pass it to you for the resources.
I need to unmute. That is the end. And so we did that quickly. And if you forget about, if you didn't have a chance to grab your phone, let me make sure to post the website, because there are the great resources there. And especially to see the previous teams from nationals, you'll see their pitch recordings, you'll see their design briefs, you'll see their posters. And so that's also a great resource, for you to utilize with your student team so they get a better sense. And also with that, we created these guides that kind of encompass everything that we just discussed, but like in one sheet. And if you open these up, what you'll see is that if the students are able to answer these questions, they will get through this amazingly, whether it's for the technical interview and presentation aspect or for the pitch. And because each of these questions reflect upon what we are asking them and what we are asking them to do. And so that's that. It provides a structure, it provides a framework. And even if they use that, so as the pitch as an example, if they're able to just answer those questions and just state it within, not necessarily that they're going to put it in a story format, but even just answering it, they will hit most of those elements within the rubric, all of the criteria that's listed out there. And same with the technical presentation. So with that, that is the end of our workshop here. If there are any final questions, we will stick around for another few minutes because we do have the conclusion of our convening. And if anything, you can always reach out to your representative or reach out to us. Thank you all for being here today.